New Thought Media Network proudly presents the 2025 season for Nonviolence Meditation Series, January 31st through April 4th. Embrace nonviolence every day with our 64 unique video meditations. Join us at 6 a.m. Mountain Time or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Featuring a collection of New Thought voices, the 2025 season for Nonviolence Meditation Series. Only on New Thought Media Network, January 31st through April 4th.
New Thought Media Network is pleased to present The Inclusive Church, Ideas and Resources for Leaders of Multicultural Ministries. The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Tuesdays at 12 noon Mountain Time. Join Tracy and her guests as they go deep and share practical tips and resources you can use in your ministry. And now let's explore the Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here, and it is the time for the Inclusive Church right here on the New Thought Media Network. Ooh, I love taking a little bit of time out of every week and recommitting, re-engaging with the commitment to build and lead and grow and sustain inclusive spiritual communities. And for you, maybe you don't resonate with the word church, but I use it because truly a church is the collection of people who come together. So if you feel like your ministry is maybe a focus ministry or ministry without walls, a ministry that is internet-based, you still are in the right place, because what we talk about on the Inclusive Church are ideas and resources for ministries that are serving or growing by paying attention to our people in our world today, and building a community that is multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-generational. There's so much racing through my brain today. I'm excited about the focus today on what I often refer to as my 4L process or the 4L approach. That is especially helpful when I personally or I'm leading a group that feels very challenged, that a group of people or me individually, when I'm realize I'm operating out of fear, or I'm being blocked and held back because of fear, even to the point of despair, maybe, and hopelessness. And I decided to share this today because there's been just so much going on. There's always a lot going on in the world. And in the last 7 to 10 days, there have been a lot of people I've talked with who have been super challenged by all the many things that are going on in their individual lives and in the world. This morning, my Facebook post started with, where do you turn when faced with disease, disaster, divorce, discrimination, Where do you go when you are faced with what feels like the complete decimation of what you hold dear? The fires in California, maybe the death of a loved family member or friend. There are floods in Brazil and Tanzania, Kenya, and the Middle East. Maybe you're affected by a political conflict in Sudan, Somalia, Mali, Burkina Faso, and of course in the United States. Climate disasters in Myanmar, the recent earthquake in Taiwan, the Israel Hezbollah conflict or the Israel Hamas conflict, rampant poverty, mental illness, homelessness, hopelessness. Where do you turn? Now, you're right here with me on the New Thought Media Network, so I know you turn to spiritual principle. I know you turn to metaphysics and New Thought way of stepping through or navigating through. And that's what led me to go, today would be a good day to pull out the 4L approach, because it is what helps me and what I've used to help many others keep going when there seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel or no end to the pain. So we all deal with challenges all the time. I mean, that's a given. And we probably all use spiritual practice to navigate that. And so I'm not suggesting you don't do that. In fact, it's woven into this 4L approach. But in our toolkit tune-up time today, which means that I'm going to be doing my best to stay under 30 minutes. Within our brief time today, I'm going to highlight 4 things that you can keep in mind. And for me, most of the time, these come in this sequence, but there have been times, depending on either what I'm personally going through or what the group is navigating. It's not a requirement that you use these 4 L's in this sequence, but most frequently, this is the sequence that happens. So the first L in the 4L approach is to listen. Now, obviously, if you're using this on yourself, it is listen to your heart, listen to what is troubling you. Go within and actually slow down and block out the rest of the world and identify what it is that is troubling you or scaring you, so that you take the time, you don't brush over it, you don't ignore it, you actually slow down and listen. Clearly, if you're working with a group, there are many ways for us to do this in our spiritual community. Maybe the most obvious is if I'm just interacting or engaging with one person and it's one-on-one, then I'm going to actively listen to what their concerns are, what their fears are. And, that's much more like maybe a coaching session. But if we are doing this in our community, in our spiritual community, then there are a lot of ways to do that. One of them is to host or sponsor a vigil or a holding consciousness, to invite people in person or online together to simply hear what is troubling for you. Hear what is troubling you about what's going on with this war. Here's what is troubling you with the things that are happening in our political environment. Tell me and let's share with each other what is creating a sense of despair in us individually or collectively. And so it's more than just holding space. It's actually set up so that there is some conversation and there is deep, deep listening going on about what is the fear and what's underneath that fear. Another way to do that in spiritual community might be to have a listening circle or a restorative justice circle, but having people come together with the express desire to listen to the concerns and not immediately solve them, but coming together with, obviously you're in spiritual community, there may be some prayer, or you may use candle lighting, all of that, but the primary focus is to listen to what is truly generating fear or despair for members of your community, whether that's your church or the community your church is located in. The reason you want to start here is because the more diversity that exists in your church, the more likely you are to miss the true reason, right? I can assume, there's a lot of fear going on because of the challenges related to sexual orientation and gender identity and proposed changes. I can assume that. But if I don't actually engage with people who are directly, immediately, personally challenged by or in fear because of the proposed changes, then I'm making up a story from my perspective and what I think should be the fear. But I want to always start with listening. And I guess I've been on the opposite side of that so much that it has become second nature to me, because I've been in rooms and in vigils and in meditation sessions and in listening sessions where the person or the small group of people who planned it have assumed what my concerns as a Black woman would be. And as often as not, they completely missed what is challenging for me from my perspective. They've approached it from some mental, some academic perspective and totally missed that wasn't it at all. So the 4L approach, the first step is to listen in both informal and formal ways. You could even call together some focus groups depending on what it is that you could plan to have, some focus groups or some affinity groups that are affected by things that are going on. And that will give you the information that you need. So 4L approach number 1, please, please, please listen. Now, just because we listen to people does not mean that we actually understand everything that we need to know or understand in order to respond appropriately. So the second L in the 4L approach is to learn, to intentionally learn. Learn about what is going on in your community, learn about what is going on in your city, state, country, learn about the perspectives of others who maybe you can't listen to one-on-one in small groups online or in your community in person. But that does require that maybe you've got to go check out the news in a strategic way, getting highlights and headlines from a variety of sources so that you pick up on a variety of perspectives. And depending on what came up in the listening that you did, that may direct you to news or commentary sources that you would not normally go to. But it is important that you learn more about what is feeding the issue. Another way that you might think about learning is that as a church and as a leader in an inclusive spiritual community, you're responsible for the learning that happens in the community as well. And so You may have people in your community who, example, the the proposed change to end birthright citizenship in the United States. You may think there is no one in your community who's affected by that. And you could be right, but you're probably wrong. That people who are in your church, that there are members in your church or people who actively engage with your ministry who either are themselves first generation citizens because they were born in the US, even though their parents were not, or they have a loved one, a coworker, they have a neighbor 3 doors down who they really love, who could be affected by this proposed change. You don't know who they are married to or who they were married to, even though they're not currently married to that person. And so on the surface, you may say, well, no one in my community is affected by this issue, whatever the issue is or the challenge is, but you're most likely going to miss. And so with step 2, or the second L in the 4L approach, being learn, it's also that we are responsible for what our congregants learn. Now, not every single thing, but on issues that are creating challenge, fear, anger, disdain, and despair. If that's happening on the macrocosm, it is happening in the microcosm called my individual ministry. And so there is a responsibility to do some education, especially reaching those people in your church who might say, oh, well, I'm not affected. Yeah, that doesn't affect me. And while I, pulled out that one example, I'm just talking about no matter what the topic is. I was in a conversation a week and a half ago with someone who it never crossed my mind that they might be affected by the fires in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area. And I didn't know that they had actually grown up in Altadena, that they had friends and close family members who still lived in that area. That when they think about their middle school and high school years, example after example after example are things that happen in Pasadena, Altadena, and the Los Angeles metropolitan area. And so they were deeply affected by what was going on with the fires, but I didn't know any of that about them. And, I expected that they would be affected like almost all of us were, with feeling compassion, but not that gut level fear or despair that what I've known is disappearing or has already disappeared. And people I personally know and consider like family as well as family members have lost everything. That's personal. So whether it's that or whether it's how someone is taking up the Israel-Hamas conflict because of things that are part of their lives that you couldn't possibly know, this is why we have to be careful about assuming that our people aren't affected by that. Oh, we don't need to talk about it. We don't need to bring it forward. If you have been building, growing, and nurturing an inclusive church, then you are going to have people in your congregation, in your ministry, who are affected by all the big things that happen in our state, in our nation, in our world. So the first L is listen. The second L is learn. The third L is love. Now, this one's probably really easy for most of you because we pride ourselves in New Thought about leading with love. Everything is love. Oh, we are the love. We're going to be love. We're going to show love. And, we like this. However, I want to remind you, especially in this context, that love is an action, not just a feeling. And so in this 4L model, when we talk about love, sure, we are bringing the love that is represented by our Christ consciousness forward into how we engage with people. Absolutely. We want to be the representation of the love, the spiritual quality of love that is a quality of God in how we engage. But the key is engage. The key is action. And in order for people who are feeling fear or feeling despair or feeling hopelessness to feel the love, then we have to navigate the issue with them, not for them, because we're better and we're going to fix it and we're going to save them from that problem. Not instead of, because we can't make that shift for them. Love shows up in how we navigate it together. I navigate it through it with you, and often with you calling the shots. How can I best support you? How can I show up for you or with you that is meaningful to you? Not me necessarily saying, well, I'd be comfortable doing A, B, and C, and so that's what I'm going to do. The person or the people who are most affected may ask me to do something I'm really uncomfortable doing, but love leads me to do that. Another thing that could happen that comes under this banner of love is that you did listening circles, and then maybe at the love level, you do healing circles where you do spiritual practice together and you go beyond just listening to actually moving through the healing process together. That's the difference of just speaking love and being love. Another thing to keep in mind with the third L of love is that true love has accountability with it. It comes with the territory of love. If I love you, I am going to hold you accountable for doing what you say you're going to do and for being who you have committed to be. And so as a leader in an inclusive spiritual community, that means you have to hold the whole community accountable for showing up and for navigating through this delicate or challenging or scary issue. So if you are conflict avoidant and you are not comfortable or skilled in having a hard conversation or in confronting either systems or individuals in your community, even who may be acting inappropriately in relationship to whatever this topic or theme is, then that's a skill you must work on. That's not negotiable. Not if you say you are committed to being inclusive or that you are desiring to have a community that's inclusive. So the leadership accountability is a part of demonstrating my love for people who are navigating something that is really fearful or really challenging for them. And then you also want to either provide resources or demonstrate by the way that you share the resources that you have that you are demonstrating love for that individual or for that group of people who are navigating deep fear, deep despair. So the first L is listen, the second L is learn, and the third L is love. And I love in the context of those first three before we go to the fourth one that the good Reverend Dr. Raymond said, yeah, we've got to learn, which also means unlearning, like learn some new behaviors, because certain things that we may have learned or that we may believe about other or people from other identity groups could be really either wrong or insufficient. And so it is really important for us to know that as we are learning some things, it requires us to unlearn some other things. And Ray also gives us the reminder that even if we have no personal connection, definitely we can have compassion and we can have empathy for the people who are impacted and affected. And remember, we are in this conversation from the context that you're doing your work to have an inclusive spiritual community. So somebody is going to be affected or impacted. And so you can't just brush it off. And the more diversity you have, the more variety, the more multiplicity you have in the people in your spiritual community, the more it requires you to broaden your perspective. So, what is the fourth L? The fourth L is liberate. And liberate is the place I think that we misunderstand and misteach often. This really is the place where a dedicated spiritual practice comes in. Because if we are using our spiritual practices and tools and principles and resources in order to navigate all that's going on and to create the world that we want to live in, this is where we go for it. But be careful, because while we're using ancient wisdom with a contemporary application, we have to be really careful that we don't fall into spiritual bypass. And I've seen this happen a lot where where organizations, spiritual organizations, and churches and individual ministers or leaders will jump to spiritual practice. It's going to liberate you. Let me quote you some principle, and you will be free of this despair. But they didn't do listening, learning, or loving at a level where there's now a relationship or connection. And this is why liberate is step 4, because used without steps 1, 2, and 3, or 6, the steps or the ideas of 1, 2, and 3, often we do more harm than good. At the top, I said that you may not necessarily find that you need to use all 4 steps in sequence. And so there are a few cases where if you have an existing group and maybe you've worked through a lot of things together over time and you are regularly interfacing with the same people, you may be able, in the response to something that just happens, you may be able to start with liberate, but that's really, really rare. Because even if you have ongoing relationship, when that something happens, people are still reacting, or they're first reacting from whatever is hitting them. And if you have 15 different people, different parts of that situation may hit them. right? So if we use the fires in the Los Angeles and Southern California area, for example, someone may have a parent who is in an evacuation area, and someone else may be reacting because it was where they lived 40 years ago, and someone else may be reacting from, or feeling some fear around it because they travel there on business, 6 times a year. So you can hardly ever assume that your story about why people are feeling what they're feeling is the absolute truth. So with Liberate, yes, this is the place where spiritual practice in a more formal way is going to show up. This is a place where you can use the people who are in fear or who are feeling despair as you worked through L1, L2, and L3. They may be some of the people who can come forward, and the liberation for you, for them, for your community is hearing them tell their stories. But creating that place where I heal and I feel liberated because I can get this off my chest, or I can share what I've learned from navigating this over the last 3 days or over the last 3 months. And so the Liberation L is also about creating that opportunity for people who are directly affected to tell their story. And then, of course, this is the place where an organized and strategic approach to sacred activism is critical, because we are working all of these big issues from a place of personal experience and community or collective experience. And so we want to take our principles into the eye of the storm, but we want to do it in a way that liberates ourselves and others. Now, I could keep talking about these 4 L's easily. As I said at the top, I've used them quite a bit, both in my personal life and in guiding, coaching, or advising leaders in spiritual communities. And they do work. Liberate, love, learn, listen. I hope you have found this helpful. I hope that if you have examples of how you have used any of these, you can drop them in the chat, or feel free to reach out to me directly. And if you want to talk more about it, we live in some really challenging times. Every generation has its own challenges. Every decade, we go through major shifts in our culture and in our world. If you are going to be a leader in a spiritual community that is committed to be inclusive, then you are going to need some tools and resources to face these challenges. And that's why I'm here. That's what I hope to support you in. And I am so glad that you joined me today. I'll see you next Tuesday right here on the New Thought Media Network on the Inclusive Church. Bye for now.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.